Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our PowerPoint presentation webinar about I-9 compliance, problems and pitfalls that you may face. And there's a lot of information here that we're going to go through. We're going to go through both kind of from the employer side, from the employee side, with a little bit of E-Verify kind of thrown into the mix here and there. So yeah, I will get straight started. Just this one. Cool. There we go. Okay, so the first thing you always have to make sure with the I-9 is that you're using the correct form. The I-9 with the revision date of 03/08/2013 on the bottom left-hand corner is the current version. It's a 2-page form now, which got us very excited because the previous version had been only 1 page. It was always very tough to fit all of the information in there. The 2-page one is a lot better on that side of things. All documents presented during the Form I-9 process, the employment verification process, must be unexpired. This includes US passport and all List B documents. The new US passport card was added to List A, as was the new combined EAD-AP document. Who completes the I-9? This is basically all citizens, nationals, and non-citizens, so pretty much everyone. There are certain exempt groups, grandfathered employees that were hired before November 7th, 1986, casual domestic workers, some independent contractors, and those physically working that aren't physically working on US soil. These are not included in the I-9 side of things. Everyone else is going to need an I-9. The E-Verify program, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning. This allows for an automated link to federal databases. This is employer specific. The employer will have an E-Verify program set up if they've decided to enroll in this. Staff members using E-Verify must complete the tutorial online to go through this. The way it kind of works is it allows you to do an electronic query submitted once the I-9 has been completed. You're not allowed to use it as a pre-screening tool, but it's one of these things that is slowly becoming more and more prevalent in the general kind of I-9 arena, particularly with immigration reform potentially being on the horizon. There's a good chance that E-Verify could be mandatory E-Verify could be a part of that. Currently it's mandatory in certain states, and often in certain situations it's something that you need to make sure you've got set up. I think more than 600,000 companies are currently enrolled, more than 1.9 million hiring sites. So this is something that is definitely going to be kind of here to stay, and something that you need to know about and need to have an idea of what is required. Brief kind of overview, recent E-Verify statistics. We're seeing total E-Verify cases, 30 million. Cases not found work authorized is around 291,000. This was from October 2014 to September 2015. We're waiting for new stats to come out, but it is definitely increasing in the amount of use that it's getting. E-Verify is currently required. This map pretty much shows the main areas, particularly Arizona. All or most employers in Arizona are going to require E-Verify. With E-Verify, if for some reason an employee, once the inquiry has been submitted, it comes back and gives you a tentative non-confirmation, this would go to the employer. This would basically be, the idea is that there may be a mismatch, there may be some kind of an issue. Now the process here is the employer will print the further action notice and give that to the employee. If the employee does not contest that finding, then it becomes a DHS final non-confirmation and the employer must terminate the employee. If the employee does contest, then it generates a referral date confirmation, which you give to the employee and must continue to hire them while they resolve the mismatch. The employee then has 8 working days to contact DHS to resolve. If they do not contact them, it comes up as a no-show and you may terminate the employee at that point. It may take 2 working days for the employer to actually see an updated status, and you'll eventually kind of get a final status, which you kind of go from there. To avoid, this is kind of tips for employees to avoid tentative non-confirmations. If you're an employee, if you're filling out that first section of the I-9, and we'll go through this in more detail in a minute, you have to make sure you're using your full legal name. Make sure if you have two last or first names, list both. If hyphenate, include the dash. If your name's changed, make sure that that's updated with the Social Security Administration. Any kind of spellings, date of birth, errors on any kind of documents can lead to these tentative non-confirmations. You can use self-check to verify that your records are accurate first. Always make sure to use your maiden name if applicable. So, getting on to the main form. This is a very deceptively simple form, but there's a lot of potential problems, potential pitfalls, so we want to really go through everything. The first one is Section 1, Employee Information and Verification. The employee must complete this on or before the first day of employment. So this, you can see here, this is Section 1, and you can see where it says stop at the bottom. That's where the employee is going to stop. The employer then has to fill in the rest. This is Section 2. Section 2 is for the employer. The employer must review and verify the documents presented for work authorization. Section 2 must be completed within 3 business days of the first day of work. There is a Thursday rule here, so if the employee begins work on Monday, you must complete Section 2 by Thursday. Section 3, this is more reserved for updating reverifications. If there's a new name, if someone's work authorization is expired and you need to re-verify them, this is the section the employer needs to fill out. As a practice pointer, E-Verify employers, even though a lot of this information is submitted online, they must still complete the Form I-9. So, Section 1, Common Mistakes. Oftentimes we see an issue where an employee does not check one of the boxes regarding status, or they checked the wrong box. The employee says they're a citizen of the United States, but they're presenting, some kind of work visa or something along those kind of lines. There's also the issue that where people do not complete their full expiration date. That must be added on here, because this is something that is going to need to be calendared by the HR, by the employer, and will require re-verification on that date. As a practice pointer, the email address and telephone number is optional. Social Security number is also optional unless it's an E-Verify employer, in which case they need to have the Social Security number filled out. Other common mistakes, the employee often does not list an A number or their Form I-94 admission number. They may list a foreign passport number. You have to make sure that they sign, date the form. They also must make sure they complete Section 1 by the first day of work for pay. So this needs to be something you get onto them on that first day or before. Make sure they fill out all of these sections. When does the preparer and or the translator section need to be completed? This section, the hiring or HR manager may need to complete if they've actually completed some information in Section 1 for the employee, either for convenience or out of necessity. If there's a translation issue or something like that, then it may be necessary for someone else to actually complete this preparer and or translator section. If completed, it has to be completed in full. You have to include the name, address, signature, and date, and must also ensure that the new hire employee still signs their section of the form. Where there are multiple preparers, translators, this is very rare, but in that kind of a situation, you may need to complete a new Form I-9 and have the second translator or second preparer fill out the form there. Section 2, so common mistakes here. This is in terms of the list of acceptable documents. You as the employer would have to provide the employee with a list of what documentation they can provide. You can't insist on them giving you a List A document. They have the choice of either giving one from List A or one from List B and one from List C. For E-Verify employers, any List B document must have a photo to be accepted. The employer, often we see mistakes where the employer didn't complete the information. They didn't put in the document title, the issuing authority, the document number, or the expiration date. These things all must be included. You can abbreviate certain, commonly used abbreviations such as DL for driver's license, SS for social security. That's fine. You also must make sure that you do actually fill in this section. You can't just photocopy the documents, attach them behind, and not complete the form. The other common mistakes we see is where the employer has accepted unacceptable documents, such as a birth certificate or a foreign birth certificate, restricted social security card, or documents that have been removed from the current list, such as the naturalization certificate. So make sure you're always using the updated list of documents when you're going through this. Other mistakes we see are accepted documents that did not reasonably relate to the employee. If the name listed on the document appears very different from the name you know of, or if the date of birth suggests this person is 50 when clearly they appear to be only in their early 20s, you could have an issue. The other section, and this is increasingly important, I mean, at the same time as you want to make sure this person is authorized for employment, you also do not want to take too many documents, because if you take too many documents, even if it's done out of, in good faith, you're just trying to make sure you're hiring the right person, you've got every single possible document this person could show that will show that this person is authorized for work. If you take too many documents, you can be hit with discrimination. So very important to look at either one from list A or a list B and a list C document. We've seen a lot of people in the past fill out list A, list B, list C, attach documents from all three, and that can be seen as discrimination, particularly if it's kind of one of these things where, for anyone that has a slight accent or a particular name, you're asking for additional documentation that you wouldn't be asking for from anyone else. The other kind of area, again, this is where we can see discrimination, is where you're keeping copies of documents for some employees but not for everyone. General rule in these kind of cases is make sure you're consistent. If you're going to keep copies of all of the documents, the supporting documents, do so for all of your employees so you don't run into issues of discrimination. The other issue we see a lot is where the employer representative who signed the form was not the same person who saw the original documents. This is an issue because this person has to be signing to say, I have examined the original documents and signed off on this. Make sure you obviously complete this form in full. Make sure you always list the business name, address, you sign or date at section 2, fill in the date of hire, and make sure that you actually complete it within that 3 business days of hire. For section 3, the main common mistakes are people where employers did not re-verify, where someone has expired, their work authorization, their employment authorization card, for example, has expired, no re-verification has been completed. So this is the key thing, and you do still need to sign this and complete all the rest of the information if you're re-verifying someone. So now I'm going to kind of whiz through a couple of different examples of how to complete an I-9 for various individuals. And this is kind of our suggestion as to where to fill things in, how to complete it. First off, I'll start with an alien with a non-immigrant visa. So this is E's, H's, L's, O's, P's, R's. The idea here is you have to complete section 2, but in terms of list A, you're going to need a passport and an I-94. So this is how we would complete it: the passport with the issuing authority, the document number, the expiration date, in addition to the I-94, which is now an electronic I-94, where someone's going to have to print this from the website and present you that printed out copy. And this is how you would complete it. So this is kind of your older looking I-94. We've also got, if you've got an approval notice, the I-94 might be on the bottom of that. Do not use the non-immigrant visa to complete the I-9. The visa in and of itself is not employment authorized kind of document. You really need to see that I-94 record to make sure this person's been admitted in the particular status. How do you complete an I-9 for someone with an employment authorization card? In this case, an employment authorization document is a list A document in and of itself. So all you need to do is fill out EAD for document title, put the document number, put the expiration date, but make sure that you're going to be re-verifying this person on or before that expiration date. these are what kind of some sample employment authorization documents, just so you can kind of have an idea of what you're looking for. So here's a few slightly strange examples. F1 STEM OPT extension. If a F1 student has applied for an extension of their OPT or their employment authorization card, you can complete I-9 and attach the expired employment authorization document, a Form I-20 endorsed by the school, and you must re-verify no later than 180 days from the original EAT expiration. So this is how you'd be completing the form in this case. If you have an F1 student with CPT, this is again, you're completing section 2, you're listing the unexpired foreign passport, the I-94 card, and a Form I-20 with CPT notation and the expiration date. Here you can see the documents. On the left you have your I-94, you have your I-20, you have the CPT annotation on the page 3 of the I-20 here as well. If you're filling it out for J1s, in this case, you have to be able to include the unexpired foreign passport, the I-94 card, and the DS 2019, which is a slightly different document, and you'll see that here on the right. So again, you've got your I-94 and your DS 2019 for a J1. Common issues. I've kind of gone through this a little bit already, but document abuse. You do not want to request documents before hire or during interview. You can't use the I-9 as some kind of screening tool. The idea is, and you also are not able to specify which documents that you can accept. You have to provide the list, which we showed you earlier, where it shows you a list of what the list A documents are, list B and C, and you have to let the employee choose which documents to present. If they don't present documents that are acceptable based on that list, you can ask them to present something else, but you can't kind of actually specify, hey, show us your green card or show me your employment authorization card. That is up to them which documents they're going to present. You can't require more documents than required. You can't refuse to honor a document that is acceptable. And you also can't ask to see a document listed from the Section 1 attestation. Over-documentation is discrimination, and this is something that they do keep, this is something that is treated very seriously, particularly now. We're looking at, federal law prohibits citizenship status discrimination in hiring, firing, or recruitment. So it's something always to make sure of, and very much so in document abuse side of things. If you as an employer have over-documented in the past, let's say you have kept more documents than you needed, you've kept list A, list B, list C documents, you've put all of this together, we've kind of, we've looked into this side of things to see what you would actually have to do in response to this. The main idea would be to try and be as compliant as possible with the rules. The idea would be to identify how many of these forms have been over-documented, evaluate whether there's been a pattern of non-compliant practice. If everyone with a certain kind of name you've kept more documentation, then it looks a lot like it could be discrimination. If it's a case of with every single person you've taken, a lot of documentation from each, all 3 of the different areas, then we've got less of an issue because it's something that, while it's still over documentation, you've done the same thing across the board. If you do find I-9 forms where you have over-documented, it's good to remediate. You do not want to ever kind of be destroying documents when you are not able to, but if you comply as much as possible with the rules, fill out a new I-9, put a note or a memo to file that says, we did an internal audit, we found these documents where, these particular I-9s had too much documentation, so we filled out a new I-9 with the correct documentation. It's also good to create an organization-wide non-discrimination policy and provide training if you've seen this come up in your I-9s. Other common issues: original versus photocopies of documents. You must personally examine the original document or the person signing. Even for remote hires, webcam is not enough. You can designate an authorized representative to fill out the I-9, so there's no need for any kind of specific agreements with them, but you are still liable for violations. A notary public can act as the authorized representative. There's no need to provide the notary seal on the I-9, but again, they're signing, they have to sign the form, and they are going to be the ones that you're still liable if there is a violation there. Photocopies are not acceptable, except in the form of a certified copy of a birth certificate. How does an employer know if a document is real? This is often a question we get, because you as the employer, how do you show that you're, how would you necessarily even know if a social security number looked genuine or a driver's license was genuine? The idea here is got to be a reasonable test. It's acceptable if it reasonably appears on its face to be genuine and relates to the individual presenting it. So this would be if you have a driver's license for where the photo clearly shows someone who looks nothing like the person you've got in front of you, then potentially this could be a fake document. Other kind of signs of fraud could include a social security number that has more than 9 digits, or a social security number that begins with one of these 3 digits, because these are unused. So this is kind of one of those things we often get employers asking us, how much of a document detective do you need to be? Basically, as long as it's reasonable, as long as you've got a reasonable, it reasonably appears to be genuine, you should be good on this side of things. Constructive knowledge. Now, this is where an employer knows, but it's kind of, so the idea with constructive knowledge is if the employer has constructive knowledge that this employee is not authorized to work, you can run into issues, both criminal and civil kind of issues, if you get an audit down the line. The term knowing in this context does not just include actual knowledge, but also if, for example, if the document looks clearly fraudulent or is clearly a fake, you could be found to have had constructive knowledge that this person was not authorized to work. Obviously, it depends on the totality of circumstances here, though. Failure to complete or improperly complete a Form I-9 can be considered constructive knowledge as well. Failure to take reasonable steps to address the following situations, such as, let's say, you have a receipt of a no-match letter from the Social Security Administration and you don't do anything about it. This can lead to issues. It can lead to penalties if down the line. Should the employer copy supporting documents? This is a question we get all the time. Generally speaking, if your past practice, if you copy, it does reveal mistakes in the process, but our general kind of advice is to keep copies. It helps in terms of review and correction of I-9s if you have an internal audit. It's also a useful defense in a government audit because you can show these were the documents that were presented, and if the copy, if it reasonably appears to be genuine, then you've got a defense there for accepting the document, even if it turns out down the line to actually be a fake. E-Verify employers must photocopy the document if the document is going to be used as part of the photo screening tool. But don't copy more documents than required, and make sure, as we mentioned, make sure to be consistent across the board to avoid discrimination issues. Other common issues: what if the employee is unable to provide the required documents within 3 business days? In some situations, you can accept a receipt. There's 3 situations where you can do that. You can only accept a receipt if where the document has been lost, stolen, or damaged, and this is only valid for 90 days. So the employee must present the replacement document to complete the Form I-9 within 90 days. You do not accept a receipt for a new document that's replacing an expired document, or a receipt for a renewal of an employment authorization card. When you receive the actual document, you must line out the receipt. So you would this is how you would fill out the I-9 if you take a receipt. You would line out the receipt, you would line out the old document number and insert the number from the document presented. Form I-94, temporary I-551 stamp, and a photo of the individual. These are considered a receipt for the Form I-551, the green card. If the 551 stamp has no expiration date, they must present an I-551 within 1 year from the date of issuance. If it's a I-94 containing an unexpired refugee admission stamp, they must present the acceptable document within 90 days of hire date or expiration date of the employment authorization. Other situations where receipt is one of the acceptable documents include AC-21, H-1B cap gap, non-immigrant visa extensions, L101P1. These are pretty much it. The timely filing of such an extension with USCIS grants 240 days of continued employment authorization. So in this kind of a situation, you would fill out the I-9 as such. And in this kind of a case, you would also need to make sure you attach following documents in terms of evidence of filing of the new H-1B, copy of the new I-129 form, proof of payment of government filing fee, copy of the I-94 card, and copy of the passport. Once this is approved, this is talking about AC-21s. This is where you've got an employee on H-1B who switches to a different employer. These are the kind of documents you're going to put, and then once that new H-1B petition has been approved, you update section 3 by filling out all of this information here, the document title, document number, and expiration date once you receive that approval through. We're going to skip ahead a little bit in terms of non-immigrant visa extensions. In this regard, you will be writing, instead of expiration date, you're going to write 240-day extension and the date that the petition was submitted to immigration. You're also going to put in the USCIS receipt number. You're then, in this regard, going to re-verify once you get the documents back and go from there. Re-verification must take place on or before the employment authorization expires. Again, the employee must choose from a list of acceptable documents. If the I-9 that you used before was dated before this March 8th, 2013, you have to use the new I-9 to re-verify. So in that case, you would write the employee's name in section 1, complete section 3, and attach the old I-9, or just complete a brand new I-9 from the outset. One thing to be very clear on, do not re-verify US citizens or permanent residents, green card holders. These are not supposed to be re-verified. So even if you have a US citizen, their passport expires on a certain date, you do not need to re-verify them. The one exception on this is if you have a temporary I-551 stamp, which you can see in the picture here. These must be re-verified. Everything else is pretty set. You also do not need to re-verify continuing employees in these kind of situations where there's seasonal employment, for example. If you're rehiring within 3 years of the date that the previous I-9 was completed, then yes, the employment authorization is still valid. You have to update existing I-9 at section 3. If the employment authorization is no longer still valid, you must re-verify on a current version of the form. If the rehire was not within 3 years of the date that the previous I-9 was completed, you need to complete a brand new I-9 form. Other scenarios, if the business there's a merger and acquisition, there's no requirement to complete new I-9s, but you do assume liability if the I-9s are defective. A quick kind of heads up on organization of I-9s. Never keep I-9s with personnel files. We tend to suggest organizing in 3 different categories: I-9s for current employees, those for employees with expiration dates that will require re-verification, and those for terminated employees that may be destroyed at the appropriate time. When is the appropriate time to destroy them? After termination, you must retain until either 3 years after the date of hire or 1 year after the date of termination, whichever is later. In terms of making corrections to your I-9s, it's never too late to complete an I-9. So if you find an employee that you haven't filled out an I-9, it's good to make sure you do it, get it on record. Again, this is all kind of a case of being as compliant as possible, showing that as soon as you're aware of the situation, as soon as you did an internal audit and realized that this person didn't have an I-9, you went back and you sorted it out. In terms of correcting mistakes and omissions, never delete, never white out, never black out, never backdate. What we generally say in these cases is just to either complete a new I-9, attach it to the old one, or put a line through, line out, write in the new information, and then initial next to it. You want to be very transparent with this side of things, make sure that they can see exactly what it is you're requiring, what you've changed, and go from there. That's about all the time we've got left here. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is on the screen right now, the RYEMM@wolfstorf.com. Thanks again for kind of getting onto this webinar today. And yeah, we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.